Depending on where you are, good afternoon, good morning, or good evening to everyone. I'm Peter Bernstein, Senior Editor of TMCnet.com, and I'm going to be moderating today's webinar, Indirect Tax and the Usage Economy, How to Ensure Compliance and Agility for Future Success. I'm delighted to be joined. I think I haven't been surrounded by this many subject matter experts in a long time by a bunch of people I'm going to introduce pretty shortly, but we put their pictures up in case you bump into them at the trade show at some point. Kristen Felgate, Senior Tax Compliance Analyst, and Toby Barger, Senior Tax Consultant at EasyTax. Chris Brown, Director of Technology, Ricky Gill, Product Manager, and Ryan Susanna, Director of Sales from Logisense. Before I introduce everyone, a little background is in order. The headlines scream it from almost everywhere. Regardless of the products and services you sell, the location of the customers you service, or that of your services and those of your ecosystem partners, 2015 is going to be the year of making things simple. Simplicity, in fact, is this year's big thing, and complexity is the enemy. Indeed, helping customers take complexity out of every aspect of operations has become, in many, if not most cases, the primary vendor deliverable. This alignment with business objectives, i.e. making organizations more operationally efficient, secure, agile, user-friendly, and hence more profitable, is both encouraging and extremely challenging. In this regard, when it comes to communication service providers, there are a few areas that are as important to get right as resource-intensive and time-consuming and as dealing with indirect tax compliance. There are also fewer areas more complex. With over 70,000 taxing jurisdictions worldwide, even knowing what gets taxed and where it's taxed is complex. And being in compliance, while at the same time retaining the ability to be fast to market and fast in the market in an always-on and always connected world, is daunting to say the least. This is only compounded by the inexorable move to what has been called the usage economy, and we'll let our presenters explain what they mean by that, where transactional volumes are multiplying exponentially. What our team from EasyTax and Logisense are going to cover with us today is precisely how CSP's taxing environment can be much less, pardon the expression, taxing. We're going to go over a series of topics, but before turning to the session over to Kristen, Toby, Chris, Ricky, and Ryan, I'd like to go over a few administrative details. But first, I'd actually like to introduce a poll that you guys can take while I'm going over these details. And you can see there that the options are, how are you calculating your taxes today? Using a tax engine designed for communication services is choice 1. Using a general purpose tax engine is 2. Using a rate table but not doing the math myself is 3. And Vito and his notepad. Hopefully we're not going to have too many Vitos on his notepad. Now back to the administrative details for a second. Our presenters are going to answer questions during a Q&A session that will follow the presentation, but I encourage you to submit your questions while they're top of mind using the simple interface on your PC at any time during the presentation and not just during the Q&A. We're going to try and get to as many of your questions as we possibly can, and any that we're unable to get to will be archived, and our presenters will be happy to answer them offline following today's event. The entire event, as I said, is going to be recorded and archived, and each of you will be receiving information on how to access the webinar tomorrow in your inbox so you can follow up with anything you missed and hopefully pass the information along to colleagues. With that said, let's see what the poll results were. Using a tax engine designed for communication services. I'm going to have Toby jump in for 1 second and just comment on, does that surprise you?
No, that's good news. I think that most of our attendees are probably communications vendors to some extent or related to that industry. So it's always good that you're using a tailored product that's focused on that particular industry. There's a lot of specialization in the tax calculation there. So having a product that is designed for communication services is definitely preferred.
And it's really nice that nobody's relying on Vito.
Too bad for Vito, right?
Yeah, too bad for Vito. I guess he needs to get employment somewhere else. Okay, so here's what you're going to learn today. Ensuring telecom tax compliance and the realities of regulatory requirements, As I said, we're going to have a definition of what the usage economy is and the importance of implementing a real-time flexible rating and billing solution to ensure tax detail accuracy. We're going to cover considerations when implementing a usage rating, billing, and taxing solution for success. And last but not least, and maybe most important, we're going to go over the best practices for successful tax billing interaction. With that said, we're going to dispense with long introductions, and I'm going to hand this over to Toby. So, Toby, it's all yours.
Yep. Well, first I wanted to start with a brief overview of who EasyTax is. EasyTax is a tax solution vendor. We've been in business since 1997. Some of you may know us by our previous name, BillSoft. Our core functionality is around our tax engine. It is a purpose-suited indirect tax calculation engine designed to integrate with billing and payment platforms such as LodgeSense. We have versions for both general goods and services calculations, sales tax, VAT tax, excise tax, and we also have specialized utility communications versions of EasyTax as well to deal with the additional regulatory and utility tax specific items that are associated with that. And we provide tax services that cover a huge range of distinct product categories and support taxation in over 100 countries. Obviously, the U.S. is one of the more complicated, if not the most complicated area. But for a lot of companies that are multinational today, it's important to be able to support calculating and handling and remitting taxes abroad as well. And for a word on LodgeSense, here's Ryan.
Perfect. Thanks, Toby. LodgeSense is a BSS software provider. We've been doing this for 15 years. We are an order-to-cash platform. We target service providers that range from hosted UC, hosted PBX, traditional CLEC, small ILEC organizations. And, in the last few years, we've been really heavily focused on cloud and the IoT M2M space. We come from a telecom background, which has really laid the groundwork for us to move into these new verticals and really helping service providers monetize on rather complex, high-volume, event-driven offerings. So we're really focusing on the providers that are delivering a more complex business model than a traditional sort of all-you-can-eat type of subscription play. We term what we believe things moving forward is going to be towards what we call the usage economy. We define that as a dynamic convergence of the subscription-based and usage-based billing models, in which service providers who can monetize in real time any triggered event in the connected world, those are going to be the providers who have the levels of agility that are required to win in this ever-increasing speed of change landscape that we've been presented with. So continuing on, what are we hearing from the market and from our customers today? So we're seeing the requirements of providers wanting to unbundle the itemized taxing from the service offering itself. Taxing each sort of subscription, non-recurring, recurring item itself, as well as each usage record itself. So in these organizations that have very high volumes of events that they are billing for, there's a lot of compliance advantages to taxing each one of those records independently and doing so in real time. So, being able to have your accounting team, as an example, run a pro forma invoice and see, including all the taxes of every event, what is this user's invoice going to look like when they receive it, without actually having to run the full bill run.
Yeah, well, and a further kind of related point to that is I think we're seeing an increased demand from tax authorities that you be able to demonstrate transparency on the actual details of those individual transactions. Historically, audits typically tended to focus entirely upon, the bottom line numbers on the invoice. The auditors typically would come in and pull samples of bills themselves and do the math on the page, but increasingly they want to actually get under the hood and see the details on the calculation of the individual rating items on the bill, what taxes applied to which individual items, and so the ability to pull back some of that detail on demand is increasingly important, and that puts pressure on that you need to have a bill rating and tax rating process that facilitates and supports being able to pull back all of that detail however far down the line that you might eventually need to pull it back.
So with Engage IP, we mediate rate, tax, usage, and services. And the key component here is it's not just your typical voice or sales type services anymore. We're getting into M2M, IoT, and a number of other new units that are coming up on the market. And our application allows the facilitation of you to take that detailed information that Toby was talking about, be able to confidently rate it and bill your customer, but at the same time pick the appropriate classes of taxation so that EasyTax can calculate the right taxes for that.
And so as the EasyTax engine would tie into the bill rating platform, LogicSense, as you see here on the screen, there's a communication that takes place in terms of passing information back and forth about the transactions as they take place. All of the details about the items that are being sold, so what the item is, what type of good it is, what locations were involved in the transaction, information about the customer, those sorts of details all gets passed back and forth, and then the tax engine analyzes that information to decide what taxes apply. In addition to that, there's the possibility that you may need to analyze the addresses and locations for jurisdictional accuracy, and so there's a tool available called the EasyGeo engine that can process addresses, scrub them to postal standards, and then analyze using geospatial technology what tax jurisdiction that's located in. And then also you have the additional aspect of needing to actually remit and handle the correspondence with the tax jurisdictions, and so that's another kind of flow-through part of the process that the EasyTax team can handle for you through our compliance filing service. So a few words about some things that, associated with this relationship between your tax engine and your billing platform, your call rating platform, that are important to make sure that they are, handled effectively in that relationship, because these are some of the areas where we most commonly see pitfalls and errors, and so it's important that you find tax engines and billing platforms that have a strong, proven relationship between each other. One of the chief areas where you can get the wrong tax produced as a result of the calculation is through that location information about the customer. The address, the billing address, the ship-to address that you may be using, other location points associated with the transaction. If it's a U.S.-based transaction, there's a decent chance you're probably using a zip code to identify that, maybe a place name from an address. We very commonly see that the zip codes will oftentimes point to the wrong location. The post office does not respect tax boundaries, so the potential that you might be pointed over a jurisdictional border is a strong reality. Sometimes customers just give you bad information about where their locations are, or you might need to resolve some issues in terms of deciding between the ship-to point or the bill-to point, things along those lines. So it's important to make sure that you have good address information in your customer database on the bill platform side that's going to get supplied with the transaction. That's very key to making sure that this all works. Another very important touch point between the two solutions is the mapping of your product categories, your bill SKUs, to the tax categories that the tax engine supplies. Obviously, this is one of the biggest determinations of how something gets taxed is what is it? Is it an apple or an orange? And in a lot of parts of the country, that sort of a distinction can really drive different tax outcomes. And so part of the process of integrating your tax engine and your billing platform is making sure that all of your SKUs that are existing in the billing platform are properly assigned to the right codes, and not just at the outset at integration, but also moving forward, that you have a process to make sure that those continually get reviewed, and that you also have a process in place for dealing with additions. It's usually pretty inevitable that you're going to have new product offerings that the marketing team's going to bring to you that you need to add to the billing platform. Are those just going into the system through the provisioning folks, or are they just picking the first code that comes up in the table, or has it actually got a process where somebody's reviewing that and making sure that a sound decision gets made on attaching those codes? That's something that the LogiSense and BillSoft teams can assist their clients with, is helping to make those decisions and make sure that the stuff that is currently mapped in your billing platform is done accurately and still information you're comfortable with. Details about the customer that you're selling the items to. This is another important piece of information that the billing platform provides back to the tax engine. Is this a residential consumer that you're selling the service to? Is this a business or an industrial customer? Some of the other things that can change, details about what tax applies. Are you storing the details in your billing data to be able to accurately communicate that with the tax engine? Do you know which customers are consumers versus commercial accounts? And then info about the seller, what type of phone company you are, or what type of utility company you are, can drive quite a bit of differentiation on what tax gets applied. And so very important to make sure that all those decisions are being stored and properly communicated in the interface. You also have to deal with some follow-on issues of the taxes are going to get returned to the tax engine, to the billing system to put on the bill, and you'll have to make a decision about how that gets presented. And I think we've got some examples coming up of what that looks like and some of the choices you might face. And then finally, you have to also be concerned about, are you getting the reporting information out of the tax engine that you need to make sure that you're actually filing the right taxes, what, where, and when you need to be.
So, Toby's talked a lot about how we work together as a team, and when we're dealing with a lot of these decision points, EasyTax will help kind of guide you along those routes. And Engage IP and LogiSense has been set up in such a way to add additional verification and steps. So when we do get customer location information and we pass that through the EasyTax engine, we get back errors or omissions or incorrect responses. We make sure you're notified. You can see those things. You can act on them. With product catalogs and SKUs, you can manage those. And again, look for things that are missing information. Get notified of them. Exemptions. When you get certificates, you can store them in the system. You can set up exemption rules. We pass those into EasyTax. So EasyTax can use them in the calculations to make sure your customers are being taxed appropriately based on the information that you collect from them. And then when we'll talk again later, you have multiple ways that you can show all of this tax information that we get back in a very detailed manner from EasyTax on invoices. And we'll show some examples on a further slide. So I think at this time, Peter, we have another poll that we want to give to the audience.
Yes, we do. So here's the poll. Same drill we went through before in terms of you registering your vote. How are you dealing with indirect tax and regulatory compliance? So your choices are preparing and managing returns in-house and happy with it. Second is using an accountant or third-party filing service. Third is looking to outsource these burdens. And the fourth is what you mean we have to file those. Hopefully, once again, that is a zero. I don't know, Chris. Maybe you want to comment on where you think, since we have a pretty educated audience, where do you think they're going to fall out on this?
I think most of them are going to have, third parties kind of filing that. I think if they're using complicated solutions to generate their taxes, that would be it. But hopefully there's a few out there that have been taking it on and looking to outsource it, and the people at Easy Tax can help them out with that.
And just to be, a little bit of a commercial for you guys, the outsourcing of this is becoming, is getting a lot of momentum for the reasons you're about to explain. So let's see where everybody is. Wow, a lot of opportunity. Using an accountant or third-party filing service. Interesting. Any comments?
No, I guess if I had any sort of surprise, I'd be surprised at the number zero on that there's nobody who's doing it in-house today that would like to not be doing it in-house today. Usually we find at least a certain number of folks that are in those shoes. But it is interesting that it looks like a lot of people here have already kind of gone down the road of outsourcing these services.
And as you guys are going to highlight, there are varying degrees of dipping your toes in terms of using third parties. So anyway, interesting. On we go.
Okay, so obviously, we just had a poll on compliance. We've talked about the integration between Easy Tax and Engage IP, LogicSense's billing rating mediation solution. So when we get into what Engage IP can offer, is we're going to offer those backbones to assist with the compliance process and assist with the taxation process, displaying that on the invoice. The slide that you're seeing right now gives you a couple examples. The image on the top is an example of something that we take from the generated data that we receive as we tax information, whether it's services or usage through Easy Tax, and it's a compliance report that we can send back to the Easy Tax team or to yourself to manage your compliance purposes. So this is a specific one for Easy Tax to say, Easy Tax, here you go. Here's all the compliance information that's been generated for that billing period. You can now take that, and you'll see later in this presentation what that compliance process involves. The second one is a sample of something that we may show on your invoice to your customer. Often there's regulatory reasons for how you have to display taxes on invoices, the exact wording they need to be. So our integration with Easy Tax allows us to take the information and provide it in one of two ways. The way you're seeing here is summarized by each of the different taxes that were applicable on that invoice, or we could go to the detailed format, which would lay out the exact tax name, jurisdiction, level, and rate that Easy Tax provides back. So you have a lot of flexibility. Our invoicing engine gives you the ability to template those invoices to your own desires and choose the right output for your customers to meet their tax needs, as well as the rest of their usage and service needs.
Yeah, well, and one other detail to point out on that, a good thing to be aware of, is that there are some locations around the country with certain taxes where some of that decision is taken a little bit out of your hands. The jurisdiction in question may mandate that a particular tax or recovery item either has to be explicitly displayed on its own, can't be incorporated with other items, or it must use particular billing language, a certain line item description if you're going to put it on the bill. One of the nice things with the Easy Tax and LogicSense relationship is that we're going to go ahead and return to you the proper names for some of those fees and surcharges. So in the instances where there is a mandate that a particular item has to have a non-generic description, it has to have its particular language, we're going to give you back that in the results, and so that can automatically flow through your bill. If there's some examples like the Oklahoma Deaf and Disabled Fund, that's might generically be billed as a telecom relay surcharge, but they've got a mandate that you have to put particular descriptions on the bill for that. We're going to return the full proper description to the invoice, and that's the sort of thing you got to pay attention to. Other things you may have the opportunity, you want to consolidate, if you want to put sales tax and excise tax and a lot of that stuff together, you've usually got opportunity that you can roll that stuff together under a more generic tax or sales tax.
So a lot of what we've kind of talked on the previous slide is, billing the services, billing your usage, generating those taxes through our partnership with Easy Tax. But what it starts to come down to is the compliance side. You have an auditor show up and say, hey, you've just processed X number of services and X amount of usage. I want to see the following use cases, and I want to see examples of how you actually rated those records, if it's usage-based, how you've taxed those records, what taxes were applicable. They don't want to see summarized information anymore. So we can allow you, and there's two images here. They're a little bit hard to see because we had to jam a bunch of detail on the screen. But we've shown effectively that every usage record that passes through our system is capable of being taxed. We classify the usage records based on the record type, the same as you would as a service that you were selling as a service type. And we pass that information off to Easy Tax to be classified, apply any particular tax rules that Easy Tax has embedded in their engine, and we store the detailed taxes that Easy Tax returns to us. So you may have one usage record, say a phone call, that returns 7 different taxes that are applicable to it. We'll have the details of all of those taxes available. You have auditors come in that need to see that information. The system provides that for you. So these are a couple screens of how we can kind of extract that information, make it available. It's also available to your customers. If you need to prove why a tax was a specific amount and what contributed to that, all of that information is available through the system as well. And we use that integration with Easy Tax to be able to drive gathering that information and storing it.
Yep. I can tell you from personal experience that that's enormously helpful. Oftentimes that these questions come up well after the bill is out the door. If there's a customer question about a tax calculation or an auditor question about tax on the calculation, and that power, the ability to actually get down to the granular detail after the fact, is enormously useful. It just makes it much more pleasant to have to try and resolve some of those issues.
So Peter, I think we got another poll.
Yes, we do. Okay, so here's the question: which compliance services to streamline? So that's actually a really good question, and I'm surprised we haven't had anybody ask yet in our Q&A thing yet. The choices are registrations and renewals, return processing, payment processing, audit support, and consulting services. And I'm going to assume, guys, that you say all of the above, which we didn't offer as an option. But which one of these do just in terms of the ones that you think should be top of mind first? Which ones do you like? In what order, I guess, is the right question.
Coming from a compliance standpoint, I see that the return payment processing is first and foremost. A lot of companies like to handle the registration in-house so they know it's going to the state, but you see a lot of that going out as well. And of course, audit support consulting services are very, very huge to make sure everything is getting done correctly and getting communicated correctly.
So that was Kristen, everybody, and let's see how prescient she was. So return processing was numero uno. Not sure I see any surprises here, Kristen, do you?
No, what I was thinking.
Okay.
All right, so we've gone through the billing and invoice, the presentment, and that's just not the end of the process. Extremely important, as it seems like everyone attending here knows, to remain compliant, to have some system put in place to have when needed and be prepared for those audits. So the key here is to manage your tax calendar on a monthly basis. You want to validate those data outputs that you're receiving, and you start the process of return preparation. going into payment and filing, and then all the way through the end to reporting. And EasyTax does have a in-house compliance team. We have the ability to prepare returns for over 70,000 jurisdictions. We do have the process of helping register, renew, deregister. Dealing with business license, we do regulatory filings. We can do the payment process, so remit payments online and do print checking. We do notice handling and communication with jurisdictions, and so on and so forth. As you all probably are aware, it's an extensive process that you have to stay on top of and keep communicating with jurisdictions everywhere as the changes continue. So just to wrap up a little bit, the overall idea here with tax management, what's the point of it? You want to reduce costs, increase efficiencies, minimize your audit exposure by managing your risks. You want to make sure those common pitfalls you're avoiding, increasing confidence internally, having these experts around to walk through all the various different parts of the complex atmosphere of indirect taxes. And of course, how you go about planning and doing that is timely planning, being on top of and aware of what's going on, ensure correct application, be it your location or product coding, and continually use software and personnel review to mitigate risk. As mentioned earlier, changes occur constantly, and you just want to make sure you're reviewing your process and staying up to date.
Okay, so mutual joint customer success. So this is just a small sample list, but LogicSense and EasyTax have been working together for somewhere close to about 8 years now. So it is a very well-established partnership, and we are aiming to continue that moving forward. So some of you may or may not be familiar with these brands, but they span a very large geographical footprint, basically global, the Numerex item there. But more importantly, they span a very broad spectrum of business models and service delivery mechanisms, meaning there's organizations that are providing phone service over internet connection to businesses, hosted PBX or hosted UC. There's organizations that are providing satellite phone and data services, providing location telematics type services for millions of devices around the world, and a hosted call center provider, high volume voice transactions. So we're really not limited to what it is you're selling, and we're very flexible to how you want to sell it. I think is really the key message that I think I'd like to get across for the joint solution is the kind of flexibility and the experience that we can bring to the table for service providers. And Peter, I think we might be ready for some questions.
Yeah, okay. That was terrific. And now before we get to your questions, let me remind you that it's actually really pretty easy to ask them. There's a interface on your PC. All you have to do is type in your question and submit it. So we've made it as simple as possible. Also, I want to remind everybody that you will be receiving a follow-up email with information on how to access the archived version of today's presentation so you can review the information at your leisure and hopefully pass it along to your colleagues. With that said, I have a couple of different questions. So I'm going to exercise my role as moderator here, which is we didn't talk about the volumes that are involved in tracking all this stuff. The term big data gets used for a lot of things, but this really is big data, right?
Yeah, absolutely, especially if you're billing or processing on, a call detail basis or a micro usage type of basis, which, I think as has been alluded today is kind of getting a little bit of a renaissance. Traditionally, long distance was always billed that way, and the industry kind of moved away from anything that, looked like that, but I think we're seeing more and more usage-based billing showing up. And if you're dealing with usage-based billing, you're absolutely going to have to face the hurdle of what volume is going to do to your systems, especially if you're going to try and handle it on a real-time type of a basis, as we kind of alluded to earlier. From the tax engine perspective, I'll let the LogicSense guys address the payment side of it. But from a tax engine perspective, the Easy Tax engine can handle over 3 billion transactions an hour. So we've designed it so that the burden of rating the tax piece of it is very minimal. It's not going to slow down your operation. There are interfaces to work with the Easy Tax engine that can handle that real-time functionality no problem. So if you do need to integrate into, say, a web sales platform where customers are going to need tax on demand, that's no issue. I don't know if the LogicSense guys have anything they want to add on volume concerns.
Sure. So as Toby mentioned, high volumes and the billions of transactions. Our rating engine works both as a batch rating engine and as a real-time rating engine. And the way the real-time engine and rating engine have been designed is to scale horizontally to handle whatever load you can throw at it. And that tax calculation on the real-time engine is done as the record is rated and processed. We can call Easy Tax out. We can be assured with their throughput that they're going to be able to return it back in sufficient time and details that we can pass that information back on to the originating location. So again,
yeah,
that handles the usage side. That tends to be the volume. But we also get into the complicated service delivery side. How do you handle the processing of discounting, pooling, tiering, and take all of that information, we bill those transactions, be able to account for them and pass that through the proper taxation rules.
And that would include things like loyalty programs where things are discounted?
So often we'll get, you get loyalty programs, you'll get special pricing for accounts, you'll get free usage, whether it's minutes or data or SMS messages or IoT devices. You're going to get commissions calculations. You're going to get volume discounts. The more you spend with me, the more I'll give back. So all of those considerations in the billing and rating engine are kind of played in together so we can get the right amount to pass to Easy Tax, get the correct taxation percentages. And then if there's changes, handle those. If there's reversals or you need to re-rate the usage, have all of that done in real time. That hopefully answers that question there, Peter.
Yeah, the other thing before I see we're starting to fill up with some questions here, which is great, is templates. I'm assuming if I was somebody who wanted to go into business all of a sudden, and I'm not familiar with this, that you guys have a number of templates, especially in a connected world where God knows how many jurisdictions I'm going to have to worry about the tax consequences about, that you're not only have been vetted by accountants but by lawyers too, so that you're taking the pain out of getting started here?
Yeah, we have a staff of lawyers and accountants that contribute to putting together the tax database to ensure that it is as accurate as possible. One of the interesting things is as you start to get into more of the bleeding edge of technology, you're oftentimes kind of outrunning the law in terms of how up to date it is in classification. So sometimes it does put us in a situation where our accountants and attorneys have to make judgment call decisions about how a particular tax is going to be applied to a bleeding edge service. We as a general rule tend to err more on the side of conservatism. If there's an interpretation that's likely to apply a tax to a product, we're probably going to go ahead and apply it just because of the issues with that. But we do try and make it easy to have some flexibility of that if the client does have some policy disagreement. There's tools in the tax engine that make it very easy to go in a different direction with application of tax or put a different tax rate or a different tax rule onto a particular product category.
Here's a basic question, but a good one, which is the LogicSense platform an on-premise solution or a cloud solution already integrated with EasyTax?
Thanks. I guess I get the softball question. So we're both. It's exactly the same solution in either model. We can either provide it in the cloud as just a web interface that users would interact with, or we can provide it, as an on-prem solution. That could be viewed more as a kind of like an appliance approach. But we found that we have probably about a 60-40 split. So 60% of our customers and prospects are wanting to run it in the cloud managed by us, and 40% of our customers are wanting to bring it in-house and manage it themselves. But because it is exactly the same software solution in both models, they are both integrated with EasyTax out of the box.
Okay, I'm glad I'm surrounded by experts here because I may need help interpreting this one. Our program offers termination and call origination, but is given to the customer on an unlimited basis. Our billing is for hardware and service, and our carrier charges us for DID and total usage taxes. We absorb that as a business cost. Are we required to?
I'd probably need to know a little bit more about the details of exactly what the customer or what the person asking the question is selling. Some of that is going to vary a little bit depending upon what type of service that you're offering. If it's a wireless service versus a voice over IP service versus a traditional telephony service, that could all change some of the answer to that. I guess to speak in some generalities, you have to be careful if you're dealing with anything where the usage taxes have been passed on to you by an upstream seller. Absorbing those as a cost can have some ramifications. I mean, you can use the absorption of that as oftentimes a credit against the tax that you would need to be remitting, but that's not going to necessarily be the end of the story. Presumably there may be some markup over what you paid, to the other phone carrier involved, and so there's going to be some tax jurisdictions that are potentially concerned about that and would want to see tax calculated on the delta between the wholesale and the retail cost. And absorption in general is an area to be extremely careful about. There's some states that actually have some pretty exclusive, some pretty explicit rules of prohibiting absorption. That's not to say that some people don't continue to do it, but if you do, I would caution that you probably need to seek some legal counsel to make sure that all of the disclosures that are probably important associated with that are on your customer-facing, either the invoice or the web page or potentially both, to make it clear that you're absorbing tax, and you may need to provide some more information about exactly what that is to the consumer in order to satisfy both the tax officials and the consumer protection folks.
Well, you actually gave me a nice segue into one of the questions down here, which is what type of assistance or support is provided by either company in the event of an audit, and why don't we broaden that out a bit, because there's got to be a lot of consultative capabilities that you're offering in order to get this so that people are in compliance and have peace of mind about it.
Yeah, and I can address the consulting piece, and I'll let Kirsten talk about the audit support piece. But on the consulting piece, at least with the EasyTax consulting, we offer consulting for assistance with new client integrations. Product mapping, as we talked about, is a pretty crucial aspect of making sure that this process operates effectively and you get the right tax on your bill. We can do that for you as a service. We can come into long-standing operations and review your current tax operation and practices and make sure that everything you're doing is in line with best practices and make recommendations of what should be done in that regard. We can also research, if you are selling one of those bleeding edge products that maybe is going to take some interpretation on how it ought to be taxed. We have research services where we can research that and give you recommendations on that. As to the audit response, I'll defer to Kirsten on that.
Yeah, we have communications, direct contacts with various all over the jurisdictions as we file frequently and have various notice issues. So as auditors come in, we're able to help with communication, whether it's us directly or behind the scenes with you, providing background details, copies of returns, different support as to why returns were filed in a certain way or using what types of transaction pairs, so that we're able to help you get the right communication about what was filed and why it was filed through to the auditors.
I think from a LogicSense perspective too, while BillSoft will have a lot of that consultative and gathering, the billing system in Engage IP is going to hold all the data. We're going to help you get the information you need to your auditors or anyone else that's asking for that information. We're going to help you with the follow-up processes that BillSoft has spent with you or EasyTax has spent with you, and defining what you actually should be setting up your products and services as, how you should do your usage, and making sure it's implemented appropriately within the billing and rating system.
So the answer is that there's a lot of necessary hand-holding, and I don't mean that in a bad way, in a good way, to help people make sure that a lot of time and effort isn't spent just trying to comply, which is really the big challenge these days.
Right. Yeah. Not just able to comply, but also be able to pull out the documentation when you need it.
Yeah. Real-time access to a lot of to this kind of massive information is not an easy task in and of itself when the auditor shows up, I'm sure.
No, absolutely not.
Okay. Here's one for EasyTax. Are you able to help with audits? I think they want a little more granularity to the answer you just gave, actually.
Yeah, well, and I guess to expand on that a little bit, a little bit more detail on specifically what we oftentimes wind up having to do in those situations. It will oftentimes involve scenarios where the auditor is going to want to delve deeper into the particular data that supported what went on the return. And so one of the common things that we find ourselves in those audit support functions is having to produce the data off of our records and then supply it to the auditor, usually through the client, in such a form that it's going to be usable to the auditor to make sure of what that information is, but also to make sure that you're limiting the scope of it to the particular range of the audit itself. You don't want to give the auditor the entirety of your billing run information in every tax that was calculated on it, because if you give the auditor the haystack, they're going to find the needle. So you usually want to work with us to help refine the scope of what data you do provide. Sometimes they'll want information about the calculations, how you got to that, and we can support providing you with that kind of detail as well. I don't know, Kirsten, do you have anything else you want to add on?
Yeah, we also frequently see jurisdictions wanting us to do quick audits over amounts that were remitted for the periods that were remitted in. We have that background filed information able to quickly pull and send off to them as well. So there are a lot of small detail, a lot of initial questions that we can just take off your plate.
So, Kirsten, I'm assuming you also do a little bit of consulting even with the taxing authorities, because the rules of the road change in so many different jurisdictions. They're probably interested in what you're seeing.
They don't generally work directly for any tax jurisdictions. You potentially have a little bit of a...
No, that would be a conflict of interest. I'm just saying.
Exactly right.
I'm just saying in terms of swapping war stories to the level. I'm going to try and be kind here. The level of expertise in some of these places and their awareness of what best practices are in other jurisdictions may lag a little bit, and you sit there as kind of an interesting intermediary in a lot of ways.
Yeah,
but,
in particularly in telecommunications, that can be, there are some states that have dedicated folks who only audit, communications and technology services and are really familiar with some of the terminology they're going to encounter on the bill, and they're going to recognize what some of this stuff is. Maybe not correctly, but they're at least going to have an idea about what the terminology is. We might still disagree with them. But there's other states that don't have that person, and the person who's going to be auditing the voice over IP company may have been auditing the Walmart the week before, and the terminology on the bill is going to be completely and totally foreign to them, and that does oftentimes entail a certain amount of education about what that particular item is, what the nature of it is, and why we think it fits within a certain part of the tax code.
Here's a really good question. Since a lot of this is rules of the road, but somebody wants to know what methods are there to handle special cases or interpretations of tax.
Yeah, that's an excellent question. As I mentioned, there's oftentimes some areas where either there's gray areas in the law because maybe it is a bleeding edge technology and the tax statute's 20 or 30 years old, and there's going to have to be some interpretation of how that technology fits in the definition, or sometimes it's just poorly worded statutes occasionally, or sometimes there's disputes. There's scenarios where some of these determinations about whether or not something should be taxed or whether or not you're allowed to recover a tax winds up in litigation with the tax jurisdiction, and sometimes that litigation can drag on for a period of years, sometimes with uncertainty about whether or not you should or should not be taxing or billing a particular item, and that can leave with the surface the uncomfortable position of having to make a judgment call. To those extent, and there are those situations where we as a tax group, I work pretty closely with the tax research group there at Easy Tax, have to make some judgment calls on that. And as I said, we try and err on the side of conservative judgment with that. But if the client has a disagreement, your policy, maybe you want to get a little more aggressive on something, you want to go ahead and recover something when it's under dispute, or maybe you think that you've got a good argument as to why your particular service model doesn't fit the tax scenario spelled out by the jurisdiction. There are tools available with the tax engine to give you complete and total control over those policy decisions. So you can change the tax rates, you can change the scope of which products are taxed, you can change the scope of which customers are taxed, you can change the scope of which types of phone business are taxed. And so that's all done through a tool we call the rate and logic modifier. It builds an override profile that then usually gets inserted into the tax engine with the LogicSense platform, and then it implements all of your policy modifications. It's a very flexible interface. It's a Windows desktop-based tool. It's designed so that non-programming folks, you can actually have your tax department go in there and directly make those changes. So that's a pretty powerful and useful function. And if you've got strong policy opinions on tax, which more power everybody should, it's good to have control of those situations.
So I know we live in a digital era, but going back to my analog days, Mickey's hands are starting to move toward the top of the hour. So I'm going to try and at least squeeze in one and get you to amplify on it, because I think this is an interesting question. Somebody says VoIP and SIP exclusively. How do you guys deal with it? But I'm curious, given everything that we're hearing about IoT and machine-to-machine interactions, smart homes, smart grids, all kinds of things where they're going to be interesting tax implications in terms of new services coming off of all kinds of sensors that are out there generating massive amounts of data. You said 3 billion per hour is the rate at which you can process things. I'm not even going to question whether that's enough. I'm wondering if you guys have, from both sides of the house, have examined what the implications are when we get to that kind of connected world.
Yeah, I'll talk to the tax piece of it first. I mean, I think that the big direction is I think we'll increasingly see those types of services that are predominantly data. We're talking about moving data, whether it be ISP data or private point-to-point data between those machines and different platforms. I think we're going to increasingly see tax levied in that direction. That's been an area of communication services that has widely enjoyed fairly limited tax application. But the flip side of that is the more traditional communication services, especially traditional wireline services that carry the heavy burden of tax, has generally been a little bit more of a shrinking market. And so the tax authorities are going to have to make up that revenue shortfall somewhere. And I think data is probably increasingly going to wind up having to carry the burden on that tax. And so the ability from the volume perspective to handle that on a usage basis is only going to increase over time as that becomes more of a reality. And I don't know on the LogiSense guys.
I'll just add a quick sort of side note on that. Is obviously we agree. We see the volume of events increasing exponentially. I think roughly, based on the information that's been presented to me, they say there's roughly 5 billion devices already connected. We're saying that there's going to be expected that there's going to be 20 billion devices connected by 2020. So that's the population of the world times 2.5 or more.
Yeah, and I've seen estimates as high as 50 billion. I guess the cynic in me sees all of the telemedicine and fitness information that's going to be supplied as a service as potentially a target for taxation of somebody for some reason.
Definitely. And as bundled in as part of that whole usage economy vision that we have, irrespective of whether a service provider is going to incrementally bill for those events, understanding how consumers are using their products and services is going to be critical to their ability to scale and grow. So even if they aren't actually, rating it in the sense of I'm going to bill you X amount of cents or dollars or, microcents for this transaction, understanding what it cost me for you to use that service is going to be important to the finance group. Understanding when and how you're using that service is going to be of critical importance to the marketing and the sales groups.
Which puts a premium on making those dashboards pretty understandable to an expanded population.
Exactly. So we definitely would agree that the requirement for massive scale is definitely increasing in importance as we continue along this path.
Okay, so unfortunately, time flies when you're having fun, and we're going to have to call this a day. Incredible presentation, and I'd like to thank everybody for attending today's event, as well as obviously Kirsten, Toby, Chris, Ryan, and Ricky, and really thank EasyTax and LogiSense for enabling them to share their insights with us. One last reminder to check your inbox for additional information on the archived version of today's webinar tomorrow. And I'm going to let's see if we can do a real fast 30-second summary from each of you guys. Give me the music you want me humming when I walk out the door.
Well, I'll start. I guess I would say that pay attention to what you're doing with these tax engine and billing platform decisions. Make sure that what you've got is built for the future. That as you might start offering more products and more volume of products, that you've got scalability to ramp up and deal with those increased burdens, both from the billing and the taxing perspective.
And just
So last word on the usage economy and what to get ready for.
So the last word on that is prepare yourself to be as agile as possible. We can't predict the future any more than anyone else can, but we can guarantee that it's not going to be what anyone really has predicted exactly. So regardless of your business plan today, what we believe is going to be most important to service provider success is when a new disruptive technology or a new disruptive model is knocking on your doorstep, your ability to take that in stride is going to be critical. You're going to miss the market opportunity.
Anyway, once again, we'd like to thank everybody for spending your time with us. We know it's valuable, and we appreciate that you hung in with us to the end today. And have a great day.